So our next question is, can mental health problems impact you physically? These food prices are impacting my mental health, on God.
Hello, my name is Gregory Leslie. I'm a registered therapist and psychotherapist. I provide therapy to individuals who are impacted by mental health and trauma. Today I'm on Ask About, and we will be talking about mental health and addiction.
Hi there, my name is Amma Jamfwa. I'm a mental health therapist and registered social worker. Today I'm on the Ask About series, answering all questions around mental health and addictions.
One could impact the other. For example, anxiety could lead to heart disease or obesity or eating disorder, for example. So when we're thinking about our physical health, they go together. And one of the things that I often say is healthy mind, healthy body, happier you. So just really looking at how one impacts the other and how they both correlate.
I really love that. One other thing that I might want to add is there could be immediate impacts. So for example, let's say if you're having a panic attack or an anxiety attack, right? Your body physically is responding to whatever's happening in the moment. And then the other piece that Greg, of course, mentioned was those longer term challenges. Also, sometimes people can identify that they're having unexplained aches and pains. There's also a lot of research that shows that things like fibromyalgia can also be connected to untreated mental health conditions.
Our next question is, are mental health challenges or conditions accumulated disease, or is it caused by a single event?
It can definitely be both things, right? So for example, you could have been in a car accident, let's say, and that might deeply impact your fears around driving. There could also be times where multiple things have happened to you in your life. So that can be maybe ongoing experiences of different types of trauma. Sometimes that might be abuse. Sometimes that might be something quite difficult or challenging like war. There is definitely, of course, ways that a single event can impact us, but there's also many ways where compounding difficult traumatic events can impact our mental health and well-being.
You could have the biological impact where it happens where it's hereditary, and that onset could come in between 15 to 25 when we're looking at the onset. And then when we're looking at a singular event, as Amma said, it could be something that you've experienced, for example, childhood trauma.
Our next question, what are the signs of mental distress I should be looking out for? When should I be concerned about my mental health?
So when we're looking at mental health and we're looking at signs of mental health, we should kind of look at those emotions, for example. So we're talking about if you've recently been isolated, you find a drastic change in your mood, you've recognized that you're not engaged in activities that you once used to enjoy, your hygiene or your self-care has changed, for example. So those will probably be some signals of mental health. And then when you should become concerned, for example, is when you become overwhelmed. When you're thinking of probably harming yourself or harming someone else, are probably examples of when you're probably losing a bit of control and you're not able to self-regulate or manage yourself as well as you used to. So when we're talking about that, we're looking at what was your normal behavior and how has your normal behavior changed from what we would call your baseline behavior.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe what I'll add to that is things like irritability. I'm not sure, Greg, if you mentioned anxiety as well, as a sense of anxiousness. I also think it's really important around considering feelings of hopelessness, that can definitely be an indication that your mental health is of a concern. And last but not least, I think one of the challenges, though, is that we get so used to minimizing our emotions, our feelings, and so we actually sometimes don't even know what that baseline is. So what I would encourage people to do is slow down, listen to your emotions, listen to your body, because that can allow you to be able to really see some of the challenges to your mental health before you hit that crisis mode.
Our next question is, can your mental health change over time?
Definitely. I mean, we go through so many different life transitions, so many different things happen throughout our lives, and our mental health isn't necessarily always in a negative state, right? There might be times where things are going really well in your life, and even if a challenge comes up, you still feel like you're able to deal with things on a regular basis. Mental health can also be improved or supported when you're accessing different resources and supports. Sometimes that looks like therapy, sometimes that looks like community groups, sometimes that also includes things like exercise. So there's a lot of ways that your mental health can be changing over time.
Great examples, Amma. And I think what I would add to what you're saying is when we're looking at does your mental health change over time is recognizing your stressors. So what are your stressors and how are you managing those things? And if you're getting, based on Amma's example, some of those supports and you have a proper support system that includes, friends, family, activities, and you're just maintaining what we would call a positive space in your mental health, yes, it may make a turn, but at least you may recognize what has helped to support your mental health and the things that impact your mental health.
Removing myths and stigma. The first one we have is bad parenting causes mental health conditions in adolescence.
This is a myth. However, I would add, for example, as we talked about earlier, childhood trauma or any traumatic event as a youth or as a child can impact your mental health and or mental well-being as you grow up, but that is a myth. Addictions are just about weak willpower.
This is a major misconception as well. What folks don't actually realize is that addictions is actually considered to be a brain illness. It impacts people both physically and psychologically. So this is definitely a myth.
Yeah, and I would add, what makes it difficult for individuals that have addiction is a stigma based on the myth. So as a result, individuals are faced with negative labels like junkie, bucket, and things like that. So as a result, that could lead individuals into further addictions based on their isolation.
Our next one we have here is poor mental health is not a big issue for teenagers under the age of 16 years old.
I would say this is also a myth. As we talked about earlier, depending on if your onset of mental health has been biological, you might see the onset as early as 12, but between 15 to 25, if it's a biological or formal diagnosis, then you'll see the onset come on in and around that time.
Yeah, and sometimes people think just because folks are young that they don't have the same struggles as adults, but the reality is that there's a lot of things that young people could be facing. Sometimes it can be bullying, sometimes it could be family stress, sometimes it's just navigating life challenges. So definitely mental health deeply impacts young people.
Oh, and I liked how you shared that. I think one thing to add that I would add to that is this identity. As you're coming of age and discovering your identity and becoming your authentic self could face difficulties during that time as well. You only need to take care of mental health if you have been diagnosed with a condition.
This is absolutely false. As we said earlier, mental health and well-being is all about our thoughts, our emotions, our moods, and we really have to recognize that we want to move from a space of looking at only trying to cure things to prevention, right? So each and every one of us have mental health, and as a result, we need to make actions and strides to take care of it.
When we're talking about mental health, we're talking about our well-being, right? As we identified earlier, everyone is impacted by mental health and has challenges, but not everyone will have mental illness. So based on you taking care of your self-care in the way of your well-being, you'll definitely be able to manage. And now we'll be talking about challenges and barriers.
How can I ask for help if I don't have the words?
I would say you just ask for help. There are no wrong words when it comes to asking and seeking support for your mental health. And as a therapist or an individual that you're seeking support from, we're just going to meet you where you're at and help you work together to determine what's going on and what the best supports are for you based on the circumstances.
Yeah, I think that's a really perfect way. Recognizing that you don't have to have it all figured out. That's part of our role and our work, is that we explore whatever shows up for you. Maybe one other thing I'll add is just kind of noticing what it is that you're feeling or experiencing. So are you noticing that it's hard to focus? Are you noticing that it's hard for you to get out of bed? Maybe that could also be a starting point for you as well.
So our job is really just to have a dialogue with you, and together we're gonna, determine what's going on. My English isn't the best, and I can't communicate what my feeling is to my partner. How do I deal with this?
This is something that I can definitely relate to. My indigenous tongue, there's actually no specific word for mental health. And so my hope is that between the ways that we were able to answer some of the questions earlier about talking about thoughts, talking about emotions, maybe even describing how certain things are making you feel. So are you feeling a sense of heaviness, for example, is that in many languages, there might not be a direct translation for mental health, but going back to some of our answers around well-being, maybe that can be a starting point. The other thing that I would say to be mindful of or recognize is there might be a lot of therapists that actually speak your language, and that can be a really helpful tool for you to have better words to be able to describe it in your own indigenous language. What are your thoughts?
I would agree. And I would just add, seek out an interpreter, or as Amma has stated, someone that could provide that support that's able to translate and bring to light what you're saying. So just really what we're saying here is just seek support, and we will work with you to bridge the gap in ensuring that you're able to disseminate and say what you need to say so that you have access to the right supports.
You can't help me with my mental health unless you can help me with my money.
I think here we're talking about insecurities. So it sounds like this is a question where the individual is impacted by some financial impact, and as such may be tied to some level of expense or some responsibility. And that may be the issues or the reason that the individual is dealing with some level of mental health. So for us, we're really going to kind of get to the root of your problem. So if there's an issue around economics and finance, we'll help you to resolve that through probably doing some problem solving and help to really see how that situation is impacting your mental health, and in part work together to really get to some solution focused space.
So one thing a social worker or support worker might do is give you access to, let's say, a food bank. So there are ways that we can talk about how, of course, are these economic challenges impacting you, but also provide you some solutions around getting basic needs met that can help assist in alleviating some of the stressors that are caused as a result.
And I think one other addition is what we as social workers like to say is like, what are the intersections? So what is happening, what is like the primary concern, and how is this concern impacting all of the areas of your life? And I think as we highlighted today, mental health is a barrage of things, and these intersections sometimes collide. So the hope is to identify in this question, like the money is a situation, but it might be impacting relationship, it might be impacting other factors. So really just being able to identify what's going on and look at that flow and see how we can best get to that place of solution. I've been doing yoga and it's actually helping me to cope. Why is that?
So I love this question. I think people get tired of mental health professionals or doctors saying or encouraging exercise, but it really is the natural remedy for so many different health challenges that we experience. And so part of the reason why you're feeling like you're able to cope better or manage better is because you're releasing what we consider our happy chemicals, things like endorphins, serotonin. You're able to stabilize your mood. I know for me, even when I'm on the treadmill, I'm talking to myself better, right, as a result of the exercise that I'm doing. So it has a lot of proven health benefits that can really support with your mental health and well-being.
I agree. I think what I will add to that is like exercise is a positive distraction. It gives you that happy feeling.
Yeah. What's yours?
What's my my movement thing is I like cardio and fitness. And then shameless plug, I used to be a personal trainer.
You learn something new every day.
And yourself?
I love the treadmill, like I said, and then also dancing. Dancing could be, I think, one of the times where I don't want to exercise, I'll dance because I know I'm still getting that movement in without feeling like, oh, I don't want to get on this treadmill today.
That's true. That's true.
These food prices are impacting my mental health, on God.
And I could agree. Think about these food prices. I think what we're talking about is stigma and individuals having to access or make choices that they don't want to. So you're buying food that you probably don't want to buy, or sacrificing food that you would want to buy, or sacrificing healthier food for junk food. Exploring this situation, I can think of a story that I went through when I had to recognize that canned food and processed food is something that you use to kind of sustain yourself. However, I recognize that this could also be a sign of poverty. In my encounter, opening a can of corned beef, and then my roommate at the time said, "Hey, what are you gonna eat that? That's dog food." And I think that left me feeling like, do I want to eat this? And I think that left that shameless feeling for me. So I could understand anyone else kind of going through similar circumstances. It's like, how do I make this balance when I feel like if I line up in that food bike line and people see me, it might take away from my character or well-being. But if I'm looking at it from a health perspective, it might be a healthy choice to make. What's your thoughts?
Definitely, I would agree. It's definitely a healthy choice to make, but it can also, once again, relieve some of the stressors that you're feeling economically. I know for the last several years, there's been so many different changes, so many different difficulties in terms of work, employment, and we have to make the choices that are best for us. And I know sometimes it can feel really difficult to, as you said, stand in a food bank line or what have you, but the reality is that we have resources in this country that can help us when we're going through these difficulties. And And so I just want to encourage people and name that this is a challenge that I think is impacting a lot of our health and well-being, and there's resources out there that can support you.
Yeah, and I'll also add lastly that food insecurity is a real issue, that for some people it starts from one determinants of health, and these impacts kind of, amount on each other. It might be start at you're impacted by food and decide, you know what, I'm gonna feed my family, but then your rent gets impacted and it might lead to homelessness. So when we're talking about these things, we could understand definitely it being a serious impact to anyone individually and as a family collectively. How can I help someone in my life who is showing signs of trauma?
One thing to really understand is that trauma impacts people in so many different ways. Part of that experience often can take people's sense of autonomy and power. People might be feeling hopeless. They might be feeling like it's really difficult to speak about their experience. And so one of the things to do is just kind of be there. Allow that person to lead. Allow them to let you know how best to support them. Sometimes it might be that they do want to talk about their experience, but other times we can try to give people more practical resources. So let's say you are the person that helps them call a therapist, or you take them to their first appointment to a family doctor. Know that there's many ways to show up for people, and recognize that that time that folks have in supporting their mental health after a traumatic incident is a journey, right? So it's not just something that might impact them 3 months, 6 months. We can still be dealing with some of these challenges 2 or 4 years after.
Also thinking about trauma in the way of like vicarious trauma. So like the individual you're supporting might be the individual that got the direct trauma, but also understand that you might also take on that person's trauma. And as such, there's nothing wrong with supporting the supporter and then asking for larger support because you might be triggered.
Okay, let's talk about the ages and stages where we see mental health challenges arise.
Good luck. If people don't tell their parents about mental health struggles, why would they go to a stranger for help?
It is really important that we can understand that there's a lot of different ways for us to get support. So sometimes it might not necessarily feel automatically comfortable to go to parents. It might be a friend that you talk to. It might be another family member. It might even be a teacher. So the point is that you're getting the support, and it doesn't necessarily always matter who you start with.
The goal is really just to get some support.
I don't even know where to start, but everything stresses me out. So do I just lock myself away in a room?
So the answer would be no. You don't lock yourself in a room. You try to get support and really just think about what's happening with you. If you're thinking about at that point locking yourself in a room, it might mean that your mental health or your mental well-being is taking a turn for the worse or changing, and it's looking like you're wanting to isolate yourself. So as such, this is reason to seek support and not lock yourself in a room. Because that's a major sign that is showing that you're probably overwhelmed and just dealing with a bit of hopelessness.
Yeah, definitely. And ways for you to be able to address it is you can of course talk to somebody in your personal life, a friend, family member, but then also seeking a professional support like your family doctor, therapist, community health resource.
I'm not sure if retirement is helping or hurting my mental health more because work had me stressed out, but not having money is different feeling altogether.
When you are in a big life transition, it feels difficult for so many different reasons, and you're also naming the economic challenges. So one thing might be to consider or reflect on, do you need to downsize? But also one of the other things that I think we've talked quite a bit about is this aspect of isolation. So is there community resources or people that you can connect to that can also support your mental health? Can my mental imbalance hurt me when I'm older? One thing to of course remember is that the mental health that we have is the foundation of our lives. It impacts every age and stage that we could possibly go through. And so you have to think, if you're experiencing mental imbalance now, then there might be ways in which that we're not necessarily creating coping skills or tools to be able to address those challenges. And I want maybe people to think of it as almost a fire. So let's say if you're looking at a fire and you're not doing anything, you're gonna watch it grow and grow and grow, but those coping tools and strategies can help reduce some of the struggles or the flames that you might see. So it's important that we recognize we can get support and help at any stage.
I would agree, and I think what came to mind as you spoke is maybe your mental health was dormant while you were younger, but now that you're older, you may be having signs of dementia, for example, that might mirror mental health. So it might be just change that change just may be based on your biology or predisposition, and or a change just based on something that may have happened in your life. So it's very important to pay attention to your body and what's going on and really follow the signs, and just being able to describe those things while it's happening to get the best support that will garner getting to that next step. My kids can take care of their kids, so now I'm taking care of everyone. Where does it stop?
This is an interesting one. I think it falls in line of being a caregiver and what that can sometimes do. I'm sure you love your kids, I'm sure you love your grandchildren, but there's also a recognition that being a caregiver isn't always the easiest thing to do. And so one of the things that you might want to think about is, how is this big responsibility taking a toll on your health? Are there conversations that you can have with your kids about where you're at? And then also maybe placing in some boundaries, right?
I was going to say that.
Yeah, sometimes it's difficult to have those conversations, but it's necessary.
And now we're going to be addressing issues around addictions.
Many people earn from gambling. It seems quite lucrative. How can this be an addiction?
So when we are talking about addiction, we're looking at, is it taking time away from those things that are most meaningful in your life? For example, is it taking time away from your relationships? Is it taking time away from your work? Is it taking time away from your own personal self-care and hygiene? But if it's not necessarily impacting those things, then it's a lucrative solution for you to generate another form of income. Then we're looking at the safety and the risk factors. So it's really around the checks and balances and understanding the impact that may be having, and you also recognizing that it may be lucrative for you, but the impact that your addiction may be having on your family, for example, is something that you also have to recognize. So thinking about yourself and also those people that are most closest to yourself.
Sometimes we also automatically think that addiction has to be drugs or alcohol, but it can be a lot of other things. Maybe I can share some of the key components that include it. So for example, the craving, the compulsion, like the ability not to be able to stop yourself from doing something. And one of the other things is, of course, this loss of control, that you are no longer in control. So what that can look like is you get paid on the Friday, and by the Saturday you might be out of all of the money that you got for your salary for the month, right? Last but not least is the consequences. You are engaging in these behaviors despite some of the difficult consequences it's creating in your life. So part of the struggle with certain things that may not necessarily be drugs or alcohol is that we don't, the addiction doesn't show up in the same ways, and so sometimes we kind of discount its impact, but it can still be an addiction.
Agreed. And I think probably what I'll also add to that is just like that change in the body chemistry when that individual is engaging in that activity, and then how your body changes the chemistry as a result of that addiction. I think is something also important to highlight.
Definitely.
Can you be addicted to cereal? Because I love me some Frosted Flakes.
I'm more of a cinnamon toast crunch kind of girl, but I think the question is really pointing to, how can different things be addictive? And, this question can also lead us to talking about the connections between our eating habits and mental health. So sometimes people are looking at different types of food, in particular things that might have lots of sugar, as a way to soothe themselves. But the reality is that of course has its own consequences and challenges.
Right. So if I could echo what you said, Amma, that sugar and the Frosted Flakes could be a way of coping. And then that coping may be something that you start initially, but then you recognize your body composition is changing. So that might become an eating disorder. So it's very much paying attention to kind of what is happening, how something could move from coping, and then how it starts to teeter in one way or the other, where the coping moves from being a positive reaction to a negative reaction, again, because it's taking so much time away from you, and now it's impacting you in different ways.
My friends and I enjoy various so-called bad and harmful substances all the time. How is this an addiction?
When we're talking about bad and harmful substances, it might be to name a few. So, for example, cocaine might be something on the list, fentanyl might be something on the list, MDMA, ecstasy, and things like this may be considered harmful drugs, methamphetamine and things like this. And then for some people, marijuana, alcohol might be something, to name a few. Yes, it might start out as gateway or party or social engagement, things that you engage in while you're socializing. However, what we're talking about is it taking time away from you attending school, going to work, and your general responsibilities, right? So addiction is that necessarily not that slippery slope, but it's understanding the impact that it's having on you and the changes that it's having on you, whether it be physically, mentally, or other.
Yeah, and to add to that, this repetitive inability to stop. So are you able to stop? Are you able to stop for a week, for 2 weeks, for however many months? And thinking once again to what Greg said about the consequences. Are there consequences that it's causing? Are you regretting certain behaviors that you're engaging in? Is it altering your even sense of self? And one thing that we didn't get the opportunity to talk about is sometimes we might lean into certain substances because it's helping to calm something. Maybe we think it's helping calm some of the depressive thoughts that we have, or maybe we've been through a really difficult time and we're looking for something to soothe us. But the reality is that, as Greg mentioned, there are a lot of different implications.
And I think that change in behavior it's around what you're talking about is impulse control, and how addicts now, you may have lost your job as a result of the behavior, and now you're stealing, right? So how these things create these transitions. Definitely. Where the change in your chemistry is really like the decisions that you used to make are not decisions that you're able to make anymore because of your inhibition, and your impulse control has changed. And as such, the behavior has changed, and then you start entering new narratives where people are now, based on the stigma that you're facing, calling you names that are further isolating you and leading you to more risky and harmful behaviors. Right?
Yeah, definitely. So I think also one maybe last thing to add is, of course, in the moment, maybe you're feeling the high or the euphoric feeling, but I want folks to also consider how are you feeling after, right? What are all the implications that are happening as a result of engaging in these behaviors? And are there things that you're wanting to change, or is it altering your life in ways that you don't identify as healthy? Right.
Another additional point as you kind of speak to that is how you're always chasing that high, because you have that feeling which is euphoric, but then you're trying to up it, and then you might, for example, have tried cocaine, but now you're trying cocaine mixed with fentanyl, for example, and that leads to that dependency on opioids, and now we're dealing with a whole different framework of kind of what's happening in your life based on the decisions you're making due to the addiction.
Yeah. So we've had a lengthy and great discussion on mental health and addictions, and we wanted to explore what's next.
I think this is just the beginning of the conversation. What's next is really around what did you take from this conversation? And I think what we probably want to identify is like what next could be. Where are you going to seek out some supports when you have mental health, or where your well-being is not in the best place? So some starting place could be friends and family, and then more formally, community health centers, your school, potentially the hospitals. So just really continuing to have this discussion, break down the stigmas around mental health, so that individuals that fall under this category or may feel like they're having some difficulty are willing to seek some support because they understand their overall well-being is what's most important.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that I want to name and highlight is, once again, we all have mental health, and we don't need to be in crisis before we get those supports. The reality is that there's lots of folks like myself and Greg that are ready and willing to support people no matter where they're at. So know that reaching out can really provide lots of coping mechanisms and strategies, but also a way for you to live a life that is full, that is joyful, and that is healthy in all the ways that you deserve.
Agreed.
We're like magic.
We got this. Yeah, we got this now. Thank you. That was good.
Yeah,
That was good. That was
you did
super good.
amazing.